Peter. We're so excited that everyone is here. Welcome. The Hand I Supply Curiosity Club was established in October 2010, and it's a series that Will and I put together at Hand I Supply, featuring an eclectic group of speakers across a broad range of subjects around our interests in the areas of culture, design, science, technology, art, fabrication, and lost common knowledge. We're very honored to have a diverse and accomplished group of alumni. Our group boasts designers, tinkerers, makers, writers, theorists, teachers, a cyborg anthropologist, a butcher, historians, luthiers, and much, much more. The list is quite extensive. With each meeting, the list grows and feeds our natural curiosities with the fascinating expertise of equally fascinating people. So you can check us out at handisupply.com and click the Curiosity Club link. And without further ado, our first speaker is Nora Wendell, Assistant Professor of Architecture at Portland State University. Nora Wendell and Coleman Stevenson gave a fascinating presentation/poem entitled Paper Houses that speculated on the space between reality and fabrication, where architects and authors alike must work. Can we please have a round of applause for Nora Wendell?
Hello. So first things first, can everyone hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. The first time I saw the inside of a wall, I was 19 years old. This is a bit of an embarrassing confession for somebody who teaches architecture, so hopefully none of my students are here. If you're here, don't worry, I fixed it. But the first time I saw the inside of a wall, I was 19 years old. I was on an internship at an architecture firm in Omaha, Nebraska. Having never seen the interior of a wall before, I made certain assumptions. I assumed that what the wall presented on the outside was what it was on the inside. It wasn't that anybody had told me this explicitly, and it wasn't that this was how I had drawn walls for 2 years in college. It was just that I had been circulating in a world of fairly honest objects. As I understood it, there was an inside and an outside to things, and constitutionally they were the same. Architecture to me seemed like an object among objects. I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska. So this is a sort of diagram I was used to seeing, right? That things were sort of what they presented themselves to be, that you wouldn't be surprised when you cut something open and found something. But walls are tricky objects. They're trickier than they look. Walls categorize, they determine that one thing is inside and one outside. This is usually for reasons of defense, whether we are defending whatever is on the interior from disease, or from attack, or from moisture. We are protecting the interior from being accessed by the exterior. This is true of walls on every scale, from the scale of a city wall to the scale of a virus. Last summer, Ebola caused global fear of the difference between inside and outside, because it was in violating that boundary that people became deathly ill. Much was made of the proper way to construct that boundary. An impervious wall of even the cheapest plastic would do. The walls we erected were both practical and often performative and symbolic. Look how safe I am in here, the men inside the space seemed to be saying to the people outside taking photographs through the window. As a sophomore undergraduate student, I understood the concept of inside and outside, the worlds on either side of a wall, but I had never questioned the interior and the exterior of the thing that categorized interior and exterior environments. This is some of the work of the architect who shall remain nameless, who gave me my first internship in Omaha, Nebraska. He took me to visit a building that he had designed, which was nearly complete. It was the office of a contractor who has long since gone bankrupt. And within the shell of the simple galvanized steel-enclosed structure, the architect had designed a whole interior world. There was refreshing honesty to it. The building was in a phase that architects refer to as the punch list. We were touring the premises looking for any evidence that the project was incomplete. From a distance, I saw an unusual wall, we'll call it the offending wall. near the back of the building. It appeared to be steel. I walked along the wall, admiring its polished, reflective surface. Everything else, the sound of contractors yelling obscenities at each other, the opening and closing of heavy doors, became very quiet. I was increasingly aware of the clarity and the precision of the joints in the shiny metallic surface. There was something raw and industrial about this wall. A reference to the many agricultural buildings I had seen growing up in Nebraska, grain elevators, silos, the sorts of buildings that are so resolutely functional that they take on a raw form of beauty. It was moving to see this referenced on the interior of a suburban building. I saw on this wall something very true. When I put my hand on the wall, it was as cold as I would have expected. But as I approached the corner of the wall, I was shocked to find the most ordinary, shitty 2x6 wood studs suddenly emerge. And to see that the surface that I had been admiring was not at all polished steel, but was an aluminum sheet as thin as tinfoil. That between some of the exposed wood studs were a few wadded up Burger King wrappers and part of a newspaper, the Omaha World Herald. The architect yelled to the contractor, "It looks like you need more of that aluminum shit to cover up those studs." And I was mortified because I'd been sort of believing the sort of fiction of this beautiful, smooth steel wall. But the truth about walls is that most of them are entirely superficial. This is true of any space that you engage on a regular basis. Most walls that are built in buildings do not exist because the building needs them for any structural reasons, but most walls exist simply to separate the objects or the activities that we do not think should be joined together for social or cultural reasons, for legal reasons, for reasons that have absolutely nothing to do with structure, for reasons often having to do more with illusion or diversion. And this cheap-ass wall was one of those walls. Was I supposed to dance? Okay. It is a total phenomenon. It is a phenomenon that the architect Rome Koolhaas refers to as evidence that architecture has become a total fiction. That anyone looking at a wall today looks at a riddle, an immutable object. Is it an immutable object of heft, solidity, and weight, or is it a provisional assembly that can be removed or changed without particular effort, he asks. I had a remarkable graduate student this term who produced a thesis that interrogated the walls of the Treblinka extermination camp in Poland. At this camp, 750,000 people were murdered. And it was the ordinariness of this architecture that was really so disturbing. The way in which its banality concealed its truth so that the victims who arrived to the structure entered it very willingly. When we talked about what his project was attempting to do in redrawing and neutering the building by altering its details into very absurd moments, such as collapsing the floor and the roof so that nobody could enter the building, the student returned to me with an idea. He wrote, "In ancient Greece, if an object accidentally caused injury or death to a citizen, it would be taken to the court at Prytaneum, tried, and if it was found guilty, that object would be banished from the city." It's true. Similarly, in medieval Europe, such an object was forfeited to the crown until a specified fee or a deodand was paid. In other words, objects that offended or killed people could be tried just as a citizen could. These largely symbolic acts purified and redeemed society following such tragedies. However, this practice was abandoned with the advent of the steam engine. Due to the numbers of people killed by trains, it was impractical to continue the practice of confiscating and banishing objects because it interfered with the interest and development of nascent forms of capitalist structures. So before this jury of spectators at the Hollywood Theater and under the auspices of the Curiosity Club, I put that ugly wall and all ugly walls on trial. So you're the jury. Walls, today we have more of you than ever. We have Facebook walls, internet paywalls, national boundaries that shore up economic and political ideologies and contain them. We have the walls of pipes that distribute crude oil inefficiently, leaking into rivers and underground aquifers. In the United States, we have walls that incarcerate 22% of the world's prisoners, and yet walls we cannot house the homeless. Walls, I find you guilty, but we cannot dismantle all of you. We cannot disassemble you and throw you beyond the urban growth boundary because that too is a wall. So instead of meting out the punishment to all walls here, I will ask the jury to be aware that the next time you encounter a wall, you should be reminded that it is not an immutable object, it is an assembly, and it can be removed. Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker, Niall McGoahay, is a proprietor of hovercraft amplifiers, but has also spent considerable time breaking things in the video game and software industry, and touring in bands around the world. His previous Curiosity Club presentation about hovercraft was entitled Strummable Braingasms. Put your hands together for Niall McGoahay.
Hi. My thing of dissolving truth, bumping up against things that I found to sort of be false. When I started doing products on my own, I started out doing started out trying to make the perfect guitar cable that you could tow a truck with. You could run it over with road cases and everything else. It was the absolute perfect guitar cable. A normal guitar cable takes about 3 minutes to manufacture in bulk. My guitar cables take up to about half a day. I built something that was so perfect it was indestructible. I ended up finding out that there was no market for it because it was so expensive that nobody could actually afford the thing. So I made the perfect mousetrap that nobody could end up buying. The maxims I started out with resembled something like this. I kept redesigning, eating my own dog food, so to speak, design-wise, making it better and better and better and better and better. And I dedicated probably about 2 or 3 years of my life to making this guitar cable. When it was finally released, it was out there, and I got the immediate feedback. It's too expensive. It's amazing. I don't know what to do with it. So these maxims held me through my first company that I started to do. Haven't quite done Guinness Book of World's Record with it yet, but I'll give it a shot someday. So this led me through, okay, how do I rethink things? And there's kind of 2 lines of demarcation as far as something being done, creating something. There's good, i.e., if you're trying to make a hamburger, it tastes like a hamburger, it looks like a hamburger, it's a hamburger. Then there's perfection, and you've probably heard the term, the good is the enemy of the great, and that's very black or white to me. To me, there's a very rich space in between those that's very exploitable for some very cool ideas, and still producing, still being satisfied, still being excited about what you do, and producing things in a timely and reasonably priced manner. That said, so that kind of drew me to this thing that I kind of kept saying in the shop. Like my guys that work for me are like, well, what do you think of this? The new company, Hovercraft Amps, we make amps out of all kinds of stuff. Pallets, radio gear, stuff that's garbage, recycled cans. I've dove through, I can't tell you how many dumpsters because I spotted something amazing. The thing with that is you're starting out with raw materials that could be completely awful. It runs the gamut from this is perfect, all I have to do is polish it, and it's perfect, to oh my God, how much glue, nails, and staples is it going to take to make this look like something? My guys kept coming back saying, is this okay? Can we put this out? Will somebody buy this? Will somebody pay money for this? And the thing that kept dumping into my brain is, it's got to be excellent enough, and that was the thing. It was a pushback against my guys saying, do you think it's good enough? Would you use it? Would you enjoy using it? When you look at it, how do you feel about it? So the melding is between complete perfectionism and get stuff done. There's the other terminology, real artist ship. You produce something, you have to be okay with it, and sometimes your deadlines come and go, and you've put out things that are not necessarily what you originally intended, but you still have to rest inside and say, I'm okay with this. Whoever's receiving this is still getting a good thing. I put a good effort in, and ultimately we met our goals. If you keep dithering, sometimes stuff doesn't make it out. So, excellent enough, I kept thinking and thinking and thinking about it and trying to break it down, like what is excellent enough? The things that I kind of do as my litmus test is this excellent enough? The very first one is the acceptance of the idea that somebody might take something that you do, look at it, use it, see it for the very first time, and go, meh, so what? It's not that cool, it doesn't do something for me. You have to be okay with the realization that that possibility might happen. You got to be able to roll with it. Madonna, when she put out a book a number of years ago just simply titled Sex, people were in outrage, Catholic Church, et cetera, came after her going, how could you do this, how could you do this? And her response was, so? That's really powerful. That's powerful on so many levels. It's not dignifying it with a response, it's showing confidence, but it's also saying, I like what I do. I'm standing behind what I do. The next chunk is self-knowledge, feeding back, thinking, what were my goals originally to do with this thing? Have I met them? And that's part of the so, that's part of the resting part that says, I'm okay with this. My goals, building an amplifier, it has to sound a specific way, it has to look a specific way, it has to be made in a timely manner so that I'm not spending a year on a guitar amplifier I sell for $200 kind of thing. I'm not going to be able to keep making amps that way. So, did I meet the goals? There's one of the little mental check boxes is it excellent enough? Yes, I've met the goals. Another thing that's very important, at least in my line of work, and especially in creative endeavors like design, anything involved creating things, you always get creative hurdles. You always get lemons that you need to make into lemonade. You always get states that you have to triage things. Our previous speaker talked about the punch list. That is one of those get real moments where, did we do this? How much further do we have to go? That sort of thing. Anyhow, so being adaptive is very important with being able to, again, rest with things and say, yep, I'm cool with this. So a really good example is this fellow. His name is Raleigh Free. He originally was a Harley-Davidson factory racer and had some non-fun times with them, and his goal after his bad experience with Harley-Davidson was to set out to prove that, in this instance, Vincent motorcycles made in England were in fact actually far superior to Harley-Davidsons. He went out to, this is the Bonneville Salt Flats out in Utah. When he went out there, he personally tuned this motorcycle, stripped all the parts off, tuned it to go faster and faster and faster and faster. And in his head, he said, I want to beat the Bonneville speed record. And my number, I forget what it was, I believe it was 175 miles an hour. I want to beat 175 miles an hour, which was absolutely unheard of at the time. He kept going, reiterating, stripping more and more parts off, tuning the motorcycle more and more and more, and finally he got to a point that he realized my racing leathers, my clothing, the very thing that's protecting me is actually slowing me down. His racing leathers at this point, after numerous runs, had shredded to the point where it was the equivalent of somebody holding a sail out. And so it was slowing him down. He was no longer aerodynamic. And he said, the hell with this. He threw on a set of Speedos. He threw on what's called a pudding helmet, which those aren't even available to sell anymore because they're so unsafe. And he borrowed a set of Converse low-top tennis shoes because his boots would have caught air around his ankles. So he had to be as aerodynamic as possible. He also, you'll note, he removed the seat off the motorcycle so that he could lay flat. So this is somebody with very strong goals. He's accepting of the fact that I'm going 175 miles an hour, naked, basically. I could die. And he adapted to this, and he beat the world speed record by over a mile an hour, which is pretty significant, dressed like that. In Bonneville, you not only have to do it once, one direction, you actually have to turn the bike around while it's under power and go the other direction and maintain or beat the speed you went the first way. So that's Raleigh free. That's the rest of the story. Yeah, okay, 150 miles an hour. And he knew crashing would suck. That's another angle. I believe that's National Geographic. That's him making the run. That just kind of shows you a little bit of the scale of the Great Salt Lake Desert. So in Excellent Enough, one of the things you kind of have to prioritize is your impact, the degree of importance in what you're working on, the criticality of working on. I work in amplifiers. Amplifiers are kind of an entertainment and an art device, not quite the same as somebody who's doing emergency triage surgery, something that involves saving lives, or something as trivial as making a French fry look one direction or another. Another factor I personally take into account is what's the impact. So while I'm making tools that are primarily for entertainment for musicians, these amplifiers actually have to last decades or potentially lifetimes. So if I was making a throwaway consumable product, I would have kind of one set of criteria, like it has to make it through the purchase and consumption period. My stuff has to last decades and decades, so there's a longevity thing. So there's a couple of factors that I'm kind of thinking about while I'm doing is this excellent enough? Another couple of mindsets I have to have is, and this, if you've ever dealt with startups or early phase things, is the notion of just, are you ready? Fire anyways, adjust, be willing to take criticism, reiterate on what you're doing, take the criticism and apply it to what you're trying to do, use that to focus. So as you're getting your feedback, either from your employees or even yourself, your spouse, your friends, or your customers, you start being able to adjust the ray gun. Am I going wide on this, or am I going focus niche? That affects your quality, maybe the scope of what you're trying to do. So you're constantly trying to reshape what you're doing. So it's a very dynamic mindset. Let's see where we're at. Okay, so you've worked through the excellent enough zone. You've talked about you've thought about, maybe you've even written it down, your degree of impact, your severity of what you're working on. Is it pure recreation, or are you saving lives? I've got the happy smiling doctor on the right there. And then you kind of can multiplex it, whatever the heck, wrong word, but you kind of stick it in between your impact, and you kind of are internally, again, thinking impact, longevity, and degree of severity on what you're doing. You kind of stick it in there, and this is internal fuel for yourself. It may not even be quantifiable. Thinking about what you're doing, that's your mental fuel for your qualitative reasons. It's part of your inspiration. That is also part of your final judgment call before you mentally sign off and say, yes, this is done. So being aware, being cognizant of what your fuel is, where it came from, why you're doing it. Stick that in there as well. These are my 3 favorite maxims, my 3 drivers mentally for why I do what the hell I do. Art, I do it for the creative giggle, the making something beautiful, having something that you look at and say, this is absolutely amazing, that striking part that you get in your heart when you look at it, and it does something to you. Sometimes you can't put it into words. The fun part, if you're doing something as crazy as starting your own business and you're not having fun, you might as well just go and get a standard job. And hopefully, the last part, money pays out so that you can keep doing all those sort of things. Those are my 3 priorities. I'm sure everybody's got different ones. Write them down. Keep those themes in mind. Those may be things as you're making things. What's the fun? What's the best bits about this? And again, going back to the why, the fuel. So when you're thinking about your fuel and your art and your fun and your money, conceive yourself of the art and fun of money. What does that look like? What does that feel like? When I've got art and fun and money, how do I feel? Am I bored? Am I excited? Am I enthralled? Am I satisfied? You're kind of trying on mental hats, emotional hats, so to speak. What are your top two? This concept helps you drill down into your art, fun, money, hopefully. So the things that you have to do, you have to give yourself a no shit moment. And the no shit moment is, I have to be willing to actually make crap. I have to be okay with making crap. You have to actually be able to say, what I made may or may not be garbage, and still push forward, not let it stop you, not let it discourage you. Corner of your eye creation is something that if you're stuck motivationally speaking, that you're able to potentially focus on something with your active mind and yet still work on something. The corner of your eye creation, an example is I get up at 6 a.m., I start working, I start looking at tools, I think I don't want to drill holes in steel today. But I plug in the drill, I kind of get a little piece here and a little piece there and a little bit there, and I start putting my tools together. The next thing you know, I'm actually working on it. That helps you continue forward through your motivational and your ideological blocking points, potentially. This is Tommy Lee from Motley Crue. He is spectacularly good at this sort of activity, and I frequently ask myself, what would Tommy Lee do in this instance? And usually it involves genitalia, nakedness, fire, alcohol, drugs, who knows. Sometimes that is a really good reset for getting stuck when you're thinking, you're dithering, you're spinning around oh, this isn't good enough, I'm not good enough, what I'm making isn't okay. You kind of think about Tommy Lee, and he just kind of does it. He just follows his instinct. My instinct is to make amazing things. So if I get stuck rat-holing into this particular part isn't working, this amp doesn't sound right, I just think, Tommy Lee, what's the greater goal? Have fun, make really cool shit, maybe make some money at it as well. A little bit of a palate cleanser. So the last point is be in love with a stopping point. And that one is, when is it done? What does that look like? What does that feel like when that's done? For me, in amplifiers, it looks good, it sounds good, it's reliable. Those are my high-level stopping point goals. And so, when you're in the trenches, you're in the middle of a build, a design brief, a construction phase, you're thinking, when is this going to end? Well, on a house, it's when you can shut the doors, turn the lights on, and it's waterproof, the toilets flush, all that other kind of thing. That's your stopping point. So focusing on stopping point can kind of help you work through it. So sticking it all together, you try and work through until those emotional states hit. That was that 3x3 grid of the faces. Which one of those emotional states are you trying to go for? Sit with it for a second. Am I happy? Am I satisfied? Am I okay with it? Am I joyous? Critique your own work via the ray gun and the pizza man. So you're thinking about, am I on focus? Have I done what I set out to do? Am I making things for consumption or entertainment, or am I saving people's lives? Bring that into the fore. Do you still feel the same as when you started out? Usually not, but does it at least pass the meh test? You know, when you put it out there, is anybody going to give a shit? Is anybody going to be excited by it? If not, what can you add to that? One of the tricks I kind of have used is phrasing such as elan panache or the waiter's pour. The waiter's pour is when somebody hands you a glass of water and says, "Here's your water, sir." And you think, wow, that's fantastic tap water. When the guy walks up or lady walks up and takes the water jug and pours it and pours it and pours it and sets it down very artistically and sets it down with a little bit of flourish, I'm going to bet you the water tastes a bit different. Try and stick that in there. So lastly, after you're all through and all done, being stressed out, getting all your stuff done, you're sitting with it, be grateful with what you've done. Everything will be okay. It will be. Second guessing yourself can kind of be toxic and a bit of poison, but at the end of the day, it will be okay. Time and time again, I've been surprised with stuff that I said, I don't know, but way earlier back I'd ended up doing my due diligence, or it was the right peanut butter person for the right jelly thing that I made. So luck, synchronicity, serendipity can also play a factor. That is the end of it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Niall. So do you guys think that Tommy Lee shaves his body? He looks like a hairless cat. Thanks, Niall. So we're now proud to introduce Ethan Siegel, who is a theoretical astrophysicist and professor from Lewis and Clark College. It was our desire to have a curiosity club around the topic of theoretical physics. We did a little research and we discovered a clip of Ethan on KGW explaining the Higgs boson in a utility kilt. A little further research and we found pictures of him dressed in tight red spandex underwear as Russian wrestler Zangief from Street Fighter II video game. And we knew he was the perfect fit for Curiosity Club. Would you please give it up for Ethan Siegel?
Sorry, everyone, no Speedo today. All right. Instead, I'm going to talk to you about something that I hope is a little different from what we've been hearing so far. You know, in the world of theoretical physics, for me, what drives me is trying to actually make sense of what we know, where we think we come from, and where we think we're headed. And this is a story that's universal to us all, and yet one that's really difficult to wrap your head around. This is far divorced from our common experiences. And so, you know, the theme of today is really about successful failures. It's about times where we confronted something that forced us to either change our preconceptions or our knowledge or our way of putting things together. And in science, that's really all about trying to arrive at a more complete truth. And this is something I had to do in my life because my way of putting this together turned out to be wrong. And that's a very difficult thing for someone with a big ego to do, is say, hey, I was wrong about this. But when you do, you can learn something about this. So this is a line from a pretty famous Robert Frost poem about, some say the world will end in fire, some say in ice. And it continues, from what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. But if it had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to say that for destruction, ice is also great and will suffice. Now, this could be about a whole lot of things. It could be about the end of the world. It could be about the end of our lives. It could be about the end of a very passionate and important relationship. But for me, I think about this in terms of the entire universe. And for me, when I first learned about where the universe came from, it really only made sense to me that it would end in one conceivable way. Because our picture of the universe is something you've all heard of. It's the Big Bang. It's the idea that the universe began from this hot, dense, expanding state. And as we come forward in time, what we see is that space itself stretches. The universe gets more and more dilute. Gravitation works and stars form and galaxies form, and they get farther and farther apart from each other. And that's our picture of where the universe came from, and we have a whole slew of observations out there that lead us to conclude this picture. But how is it going to end? Right? If this is what our past looks like, you can imagine three possible things happening, right? The universe is expanding. Well, you can imagine three different things. You can imagine a universe where you start off with this tremendous expansion, where things are getting farther and farther apart, but throughout all of space, you have matter, you have energy, and you have gravity. And maybe as things get farther and farther apart, you'll run into a situation where gravity wins, where there's enough gravity to take this expanding space, to take all the galaxies that are flying apart, and that attractive force can pull everything back together, where it can cause that expansion to stop, to reach a maximum size, and then for the universe to recollapse. and end in what we call a big crunch. You can also imagine the exact opposite case, the second case, where yes, you have this initial rapid expansion, but you have gravity working to slow it. But instead of there being enough gravity and enough matter and enough energy to make it recollapse, maybe you don't have quite enough. Maybe that initial expansion continues farther and farther into the future, and it never ceases. And so these galaxies will just continue to fly apart from one another. And that's what we'll be left with, is a universe where everything slowly disappears from view, where gravity continues to work, but it's never sufficient. Or maybe, right, maybe the porridge isn't too hot or too cold, but maybe it's just right, Goldilocks. Maybe we live on this perfectly balanced state where the expansion goes on and gravity works to slow it down, and it continues and slows, but never ceases. That the expansion rate asymptotes to zero. Right, you all know what asymptotes are, either from high school math or from paying off a credit card balance, that it gets closer and closer to zero, but you never quite get there. All right? So this is what happens. The expansion can asymptote towards zero, but never recollapse. Maybe if you just had one more atom in the entire universe, you would get that first case where you can recollapse in a big crunch. Maybe if you had one fewer, you would expand forever and ever. For me, when I was thinking about it, I was sure it had to be the first case. After all, the universe started off from this hot, dense state, and it only made sense that it had to have come from somewhere, where there was a total positive amount of energy. And if that were true, if the total amount of energy in the universe is positive, then you would have enough mass to recollapse it. And it would recollapse, you would get a big crunch, and maybe it would start all over again. That was what I thought was going to happen. So how can we tell which universe we have, right? You can look at these three different cases laid out a little bit differently, right? All of them display the same present. You can have a recollapsing universe, you can have a universe that expands forever, or you can have a universe right on the border between the two. But what you'll notice when we look not forward in time, we don't know how to do that yet, but if you look back in time, you can see that the details of the past are a little bit different. These three different cases of what the universe will wind up becoming have slightly different signatures to the past. And so, if this is where we are now, when we look farther and farther back in time, we can start to tell these different types of universe apart. And so this was the goal of cosmology, of the science of uncovering what the fate of the universe is. For decades, people were trying to measure how fast is the universe expanding, how much matter and energy is in it, and what was it doing in the distant past. And this is something we can do because the speed of light is finite. The farther away you're looking at an object, that light has to travel across the universe to you. So if you look at something a light year away, it takes a year for that light to travel to you. So if you look 1,000,000 light years away, or 1,000,000,000 light years away, or 10 billion light years away, you are looking farther and farther back in the past, and you can start to tell which universe you live in from the other options. So all three were viable possibilities for a long time. The Big Bang as a theory, by the way, first came out in the 40s, and it was universally accepted by the 60s. So the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, people were looking at all the different possibilities, and everything was still possible. We didn't have enough data. And then in 1998, the first decisive data came in. You will notice a few black and blue lines over on this diagram. And you will notice that the case I thought was right, the lower black line, does not really fit the data. In fact, the middle black line also does not fit the data. That was the case where the universe was perfectly balanced in that Goldilocks case. In fact, that top black line is still too low. That top black line is the case where the universe expands forever. It looked like the universe was doing something not only that I didn't expect, but that no one had expected. That it was doing none of those three possibilities. What the data was indicating was that in addition to these three possible fates of the universe, there was a fourth one. There was one that we hadn't anticipated at all. And this possibility was that, maybe the universe will start to expand rapidly, and gravitation will pull things in and slow that expansion rate down. But then, at some critical time, after billions of years, that expansion rate will start to speed up once again. That is what the data was showing, and this was a big surprise for a whole lot of people. And there were some people, as soon as this came out, that were very quick to accept it, that were very quick to look at the data and say, aha, not recollapsing, not coasting, not that critical case in between, but this different case, this accelerating case. And you look at this data, and it's very clearly on the yellow line and not on any of the others. I did not accept this in 1998. In fact, I did not accept this in 1999 or 2000 or 2001. It took me quite a bit of time. And I don't think, of course, we all like to be right. It makes us feel good when we're among the first to be right. But, there's a saying that's been going around for a long time that says extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And the evidence for this, it was pretty good, but it's also important to remember it was only coming from one source, and it wasn't, I would say, overwhelming evidence. You worry in science, just as you worry in anything, well, what if we have it wrong? What if I'm fooling myself? Right? This happens all the time in science and in all aspects of our lives. From, they said they discovered these particles are moving faster than light. And you're like, well, Einstein's been right every time for over 100 years. Is it really moving faster than light? Probably not. To, this person who was super untrustworthy for my entire life suddenly thinks I should trust them. You're going to take a little bit of convincing, I hope. All right? It's an extraordinary conclusion. Do we have enough extraordinary evidence? And for me, I would say there are a bunch of things you have to ask yourself. One of them is if these distant objects appear fainter than you expected them to, and that's why you conclude the universe is accelerating. What's one way you could fool yourself? Well, maybe there's something out there that blocks some of the light from them. Maybe these objects aren't fainter because they're actually farther away. Maybe they're fainter because there's something out there making them just appear that way. So that, for me, was something you had to rule out before you're going to accept this. Something else? There are a couple of different ways we use supernovae to measure these. There are a couple of different ways to make them, right? You can make them from two white dwarfs that merge together, or you can make them from a star that siphons mass off of another. What if these supernovae were different in the past than they are today? Or moreover, what if the supernovae were the same, but the places, the environments where they were occurring were distant in the past? Could that bias your results? And finally, well, could the light coming from these distant objects, could the light itself be going somewhere? Could it be transforming into other particles or disappearing somehow? To me, these were all things you had to rule out if you wanted to accept this new data. And not everybody did, particularly some people who worked on this in 1998 thought I was an idiot. And boy, in hindsight, maybe I was. But there are two things you have to do if you want to convince yourself. One of them is to rule out the known possible errors. So all these errors we talked about, you have to rule them out. And how do you do that? You gather a whole bunch of different data, and you rule out each one of them. And you compare them with all the different possible pictures. And you can see, as of 2015, which is this bottom graph, boy, this is really clearly along only one of these curves. The others are really definitively ruled out. The second thing, though, and this is maybe more important, is you want independent confirmation, not just from different teams and different people, but from completely different lines of evidence. And so we have that. Not only do we look at distant pop supernovae going off in the universe, we also look at fluctuations in the leftover glow from the Big Bang itself. We also look at how galaxies cluster together. This is an image, by the way, looking straight north of the galactic pole. Every pixel in this image is a galaxy. This is how the universe clusters together. And if you learn how the universe clusters together and you know the laws of physics, you can figure out what is this made of, and therefore, what is its fate. And this is what we've got. By 2003, we had these three independent lines of evidence from supernovae, from the microwave background, the leftover glow from the Big Bang, and from clusters of galaxies. Three independent measurements, completely different lines of thinking that all point towards this one picture. On the x-axis here, this is the matter density of the universe. If it were right here, if we had 100% matter density and 0 of this other stuff, right? That would be a critical universe. That would be a universe that was that Goldilocks case. More dense than that, you recollapse. Less dense than that, you expand forever. But this y-axis, that positive stuff on the y-axis, that's what makes you speed up. Note how, and this is today, okay, this is 2011, but this is still pretty good. Note how even if you took this supernova data away completely, if you said, I've never seen a supernova, I don't know anything about it, that whole original line of thinking, I'm going to take it away, you would still point to that same picture. It'd be a little less precise, but it would still give you the same conclusion. Now, realistically, that data was in place in 2003. How did I convince myself? Well, I didn't do it in 1998, when the first groups became convinced because that supernova data was there. I didn't become convinced in 2000 or 2001, when the first significantly improved supernova data was released, although more people were. I didn't become convinced in early 2003, when the first data from the WMAP satellite of the cosmic microwave background was released. That was that second independent piece of evidence. But I was convinced in late 2003, early 2004, when all of that data was combined, when we had the large-scale structure, the clustering data, the distant galaxies, and the microwave background, and the supernovae. And it became clear that even if you didn't have the supernova data there, you would still reach that same conclusion. Now, that's just my line of thinking. And the fact that it took me really an extra year before I think a reasonable skeptical person would have been convinced, like, I'll own that. That's really my bad. But the fact that it takes 5 years to alter your picture for something as massive as how the entire universe is going to end, I think that's something that we should be skeptical of. I think that's something we should not only make it difficult to change our mind, but also to set out criteria for what are the things I could do, I could see, that we could go out and look for, that it would take to change my mind, and if we met them, I would change it. There are lots of things we think of that are very difficult to do that. If we're true to ourselves and true to the idea that there is a truth out there, we should be able to do that for ourselves. We should be able to go and look and say, I believe this for these reasons. But if you can show me better reasons, different reasons, I'll even tell you what they are, what they would be, then I'm going to change my mind too. And what that gives us today, when we talk about our fate of the universe, with everything we know to the best of our knowledge, with this new picture, it means that when we look out at the cosmic web of structure, when we look out at the distant galaxies in the universe, as the years tick by tens of billions at a time, these galaxies that we see are going to get harder and harder to see. We might be able to see super far out, but we're only going to see the ones nearer to us as time goes on, because they're going to speed away and get redder. And over time, there'll be an even smaller region we can see. And again, fainter and redder. And this will continue and continue until we're the only galaxy left that we can see in the entire universe. So it isn't going to end in fire, as we thought of, but for destruction, ice is also great and will suffice. Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is Mike Merrill, who holds the distinction of being the world's only publicly traded person. In his previous Curiosity Club talk, he discussed how his shareholders became a crowdsourced decision-making engine for his romantic relationships. And recently, his shareholders voted him to shave his vacation beard and disallowed requests for facial hair for 2 years. Since we don't really think that jokes about Portland and beards are relevant or funny, we'll skip it. Ladies and gentlemen, Mike Merrill.
My talk is on such a smaller scale. So, quick review. Publicly traded person, which means I sell shares in myself, and those shares trade between my shareholders. So I have a kind of running, active sense of how valuable I am to the world. And right now it's right about $5 a share. It's a good time to buy. Hot tip. I don't do any dividend sharing or anything like that. So the only way to make money is if the stock price goes higher. However, the main thing that the shareholders are voting on are these various questions in my life. So normally, if I have a question I would ask my friends, I pose that to the shareholders, and they help guide my life decisions. At something as small as which smartphone should I buy, to as large as what I should do in my romantic life. The sort of coming attraction of this whole thing is the story got sold to Hollywood, and so Jason Bateman will hopefully be playing me in a movie, which is very exciting. So that's just precursor background information. The real thing I want to talk to you today about is why investing in the stock market is a terrible idea. And now if this is your job, if you're spending 5 days a week, 8 to 10 hours a day doing this, this doesn't apply to you because you have special privileges and advantages. But for most of us, it's terrible because it is an incredibly complicated thing. Maybe not as complicated as where the universe is going. But the complexity in the market is for good reason. It creates liquidity. It means you can exit your position and do all these other things. It means that those traders that are doing it all day, every day, they can hedge bets and they can take these large amounts of money and do incredibly complicated things with them that you and I do not understand. And part of this is like, I've looked up all of these words at one point or another, but I'm a hobbyist in this, and so I don't remember them. It's not part of my everyday jargon that I'm talking to my coworkers about these things. And these are super valuable terms if you're doing that, because it creates this shorthand that allows them to talk about things much more quickly. But if you're outside of that, you're disadvantaged by that complexity because they're doing things that are just so much more advanced than you're ever going to be able to do. Now, the opposite of complexity is the system that I created for myself, which I sort of horribly diagrammed here, which is that the system that I created to sell shares of me is so simple. You have like, these people want to buy shares and they have some money, and these people want to sell shares and they want some money. It's pretty clear, right? But nothing lines up perfectly, so nothing trades. And so it only works when somebody trades what they want or what they're willing to give up in order to trade perfectly. And there's plenty of problems with simplicity as well. So I don't want to say that only complexity is a problem, but it is one of the reasons investing is a terrible idea. Another one is risk. And I'm not talking about like a stock market crash or something like that. I don't think that's very likely. Again, who knows? I don't know. What I'm talking about is the risk that is you can't know, right? Even the SEC says, here are these documents that a company has to provide that tells you the quote-unquote truth of a company. There's quarterly reports where they get on the phone and they tell you everything that's happening in a company. But not really, right? Like, an analyst says, oh, we say hold this stock. And what they mean is, you should sell that stock, right? And they say strong buy. That means you should probably buy. Because the whole system is kind of, again, it's insider, right? Everything is inside baseball in that market. The risk is also you can never get to know the people that are really in charge of what's happening with your money. So you have somebody like Bernie Madoff who was able to basically do a pyramid scheme, right? He was able to get people to trust him to manage his money. And everyone was like, oh, great, take my money and show me returns. And then it turns out doing he controlled all the complexity and just told everyone very simple answers. So that's an aspect of risk where you don't get to know what people are doing with that money. You just trust them and it's gone. Now, for me, that same risk probably exists. You have to trust me because I am not only the product, I'm also the market. I'm also my own SEC. I'm kind of all of it combined. But you can take me out to coffee, you can read what I write, you can watch me stumble around a presentation, and you can get a sense of who I am and if you want to invest or not. So I think that idea of being knowable is an aspect of reducing risk, and I think that's something you can't have in the stock market. Everything is designed to be quote-unquote fair, but also a little bit opaque. And finally, and this is a pretty big reason, the stock market is incredibly boring. And remove all the math from the stock market, remove all of that, and it's still incredibly boring. And you might be thinking, well, what about Apple and Tesla? I want to talk about the Apple Watch, and Elon Musk is shooting people through tubes in California, and that's exciting. But what we're not talking about is all of the other companies where so much of that money is churning around. These are 5 companies. This was a while ago that I made this slide, but that had just gone public on the day that I made this slide. No one has heard of these companies. I would be shocked if anyone's heard of any of these companies. I chose one at random to look into because I was curious. I was like, oh, let's say I want to invest. Let's see what's up. Oh, midstream partners? What? Midstream energy infrastructure assets. So if you want to invest in Pentex, you have to become an expert on midstream energy infrastructure assets. That's boring. You also have to know about the natural gas value chain, which is the whole thing, not just the midstream part where they are, but the whole thing from beginning to end, what's before, what's after. You probably want to look up what all these guys did, you want to learn what treating, that is terribly, and then that's for one company. You also have to learn what all their competitors are doing that are publicly traded to see if maybe there's a better option out there than Pentex. So, good luck. If you're not spending your 8 hours a day, 5 days a week doing this, then that boredom is probably going to rule out any chance of success. Again, on the flip side, you got the exciting options of voting for my life, such as whether or not I should keep my collectible spoon collection, which did not pass. So that was sad for me. So, complexity, risk, and boredom, 3 great reasons to not invest in the stock market. Ultimately, then you're wondering, well, what should I invest in? The stock market is far too vast, complicated thing. I can't put my money there. But also you said I can't put my money in your small experimental thing either. And so we're kind of stuck because there's no good place. Interestingly, just this year, next slide, Oregon passed a law that said that a company in Oregon can sell securities of itself to anyone. And this is a huge thing that you probably didn't know you weren't allowed to do. You're not able to go and buy shares in the Hollywood Theater's a nonprofit, bad example, but in your neighborhood coffee shop, right? You're not allowed to buy shares in them because the SEC says all these requirements have to be met. You have to be very rich. You have to only solicit in certain ways. There's all these hoops they have to jump through. Oregon said, if we just do everything just within the bounds of our own state, then the SEC doesn't have to be involved. So as long as it's intrastate, a company and follows these other rules, which are long and complicated because it's still government, but a company can say, here's some shares you can invest in this, which is an amazing opportunity. And I personally, being publicly traded, got very excited about. In my day job at Chroma, we're working on a platform to allow that to happen. And we haven't launched yet because we also have to get state approval, but it's coming. So I want to talk about some examples of what that might look like in comparison to all of the things that are bad about something that's too small or something that's too large. And I think coffee is such a good example because I know very well coffee. I drink it every day. I go to all these coffee shops. I have a very good understanding of which ones I would want to invest in, which is most of them. I believe in them. It's a pretty good product that people come back to very often. And you can have your favorites, and you can watch them put out products, and you can kind of see them develop. And, think about Stumptown, and if you had been around in 1999 and bought shares in Stumptown, then right now you'd be sitting on probably a pretty good profit because TSG, an investment group, has bought up, I believe, the majority of Stumptown. Will probably turn it around and sell it to Nestle or something in the future, and you'd be just like, oh, I just made so much money on this wonderful, wonderful company that was in my own backyard that I understood because I saw it grow, saw them start with one coffee shop, then another. They started roasting, they started putting out these amazing cold brew products. That nitro, the coffee with that stuff is awesome. And so within the state, within your own local environment, you have the ability to remove this sense of complexity because it's a simple offering. There's no shorting. There's not these massive, complicated options. It's just simply, it's a very simple undertaking. The risk is removed because you understand it. It's not removed, it's reduced. They could still fail. So the risk is reduced because you can get to know the owners of the coffee shop. You can get to know how many people go through. You can sit there and enjoy the product and compare it against each other. It's a very knowable thing to invest in a small local company. And the boredom is eliminated almost completely because you can be an active participant in a way that matters in a local company. If I jump around a lot in the world and I say, go to this one coffee shop, Kova has the best cold brew or Stumptown has the best Nicaraguan coffee, whatever it is, I can make an impact and I can convince people to go there in a way that if I was like, go to Starbucks, I'm not going to have a large enough impact on that. So I think the aspect of having a direct involvement is super, super exciting in this. And that's basically it. That's the end. This has not quite happened yet, but it's just about to. And you guys all get to know about it before everybody else. Because, like I said, it's not quite there. You're on the cutting edge. And this is all going to happen this year, and you're going to have these opportunities. And so just as you're walking around, think about all of your favorite places and which ones you would want to invest in, and imagine what sort of a local stock exchange might look like very, very soon. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Mike. All right, next we have Coleman Stevenson, a poet and educator who I mentioned before did a joint Curiosity Club presentation with Nora Wendell entitled Paper Houses. She has written a book entitled The Accidental Rarefication of Pattern Number 5609, which is available from Bedouin Books. Let's have a round of applause for Coleman Stevenson.
Hi. There are a lot of people here. They were all sitting behind me. So you'll see eventually in this presentation I am also going to talk about space, but I am going to talk about space in a very different way than what you heard earlier. So don't expect more of that. So this is essentially what I'm going to start with. Our social contract, which you may remember from probably elementary school, or things my mother always said. When I did absolutes, my understanding was colored in large part by the informal daily instruction of my mother, who passed along her worldview to me with a force I did not know how to question. From her, I had my introduction to the social contract. At regular intervals, directly or indirectly in comparison with other children, she would say to me, "You're one of the good ones." I would always feel a twinge of responsibility, though at the time I believed this was her compliment to me, that she possessed a sort of Rousseauian philosophy, that I had somehow been able to retain my pure state of being, uncorrupted by the forces of peer pressure that would see me altered. I think now it's also possible to believe that she was giving the compliment to herself, that she had protected me from corruption. Had she filled the Lockean blank slate of my mind and self, operating as my fair representative to the larger world? Or had she taken the little Hobbesian devil of me and rehabilitated it with structure as the monarch of my little life? But what did good mean to my mother anyway? Her "you're one of the good ones" hovered between surface and interior assumptions. Let me set the cultural scene. It was the Deep South, Birmingham, Alabama, where you need signs like this because it was not unusual to see women fully made up, but with their hair in curlers tucked under these gauzy scarves, pushing their carts through the aisles of Piggly Wiggly. Every Sunday, my grandmother would sit at her kitchen table while my mother rolled her freshly purpled hair. It was my job to fetch the pink stored in an old Tupperware bin from the linen closet in the hallway. I observed this ritual and learned the delicate balance of living by the contradictory rules of Southern society. This was starkly contrasted by my mother frequently pointing out what I did not want to turn into, namely the hoods who smoked cigarettes and hung out around the tattoo parlor on the bad side of town. Clearly, at some point, I either went over to the dark side or I redetermined for myself what could qualify as good. So how did I come to see that life does not consist of a set of fixed absolutes? Well, first, as I grew, the idea of permanence seemed supported by everything around me. I watched seasons shifting one to the next, then back again, and I learned to expect. Every spring, the azaleas swallowed the front yard in neon clouds. Magnolias shoved their big, sweet hands into my face. I chased toads under hosta leaves, caught tadpoles in glass jars, and watched as each leg sprouted, fattened, and bloomed. Life went on, even in droughts or late freezes. I loved the predictability of science and nature. There seemed so much to trust, and in school, the same simplified absolutes about the world were reinforced. My elementary school days were marked by a number of rare occurrences in the cosmos. Science class and popular culture alike were obsessed with space. We awaited the return of Halley's Comet. We memorized the names of all the planets using various mnemonic devices. In my house, it was, of course, my very excellent mother just served us 9 pickles for Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. I was enthralled. I still believe I ended makers of the drink of astronauts in business far after the space craze had passed most children by. I wanted to know every fact about every planet. I made models of the solar system and slept beneath a glow-in-the-dark star chart every night. When my class took a field trip to the local science museum, the Red Mountain Museum, I stood the entire time in the dark room with the textured, light-up model of the surface of the sun, watching it churn. When the guest teacher asked if anyone knew the width of Saturn's rings, the room was still until my hand shyly started to raise. I had even memorized that exact number as reported in paraphernalia. It is my first specific memory. That year, we also prepared for a teacher, just like one of our own, to join the team of trained astronauts in space. On January 28th, 1986, the whole school gathered in the gymnasium. I was wearing my hot pink stirrup pants and an oversized light pink Mardi Gras sweatshirt with the masks of tragedy and comedy decaled on the front. We were arranged by grade, the oldest in the very back, so we could barely see the single TV set positioned in the front of the room. We counted down together as we'd learned to do in class, so pleased to be part of the greatest exploration known to man. We were cheering liftoff when, 73 seconds later, the cheers morphed into gasps. As we were lined up and instructed to move quietly back to classrooms, we could see our usually stern teachers were in tears. Word gradually trickled down the line that the Challenger had exploded. Mother had an answer for all of this, too. Life's not fair. I could feel, even then, the frustration seething under those words, like the surface of that museum sun. Time went on, and this harsh schooling of impermanence repeated through deaths of relatives and pets, through breakups with no hope of reconciliation, through learning that Pluto, lovely little Pluto out there in the far, dark reaches, isn't really a planet after all, but a Plutoid, too far away and orbiting at too different an angle to be in our proper scheme. Now we have no pickles. Now we are served nothing but the cold, hard fact that not even science is fixed and absolute. I know now it is impossible to exactly measure the width of Saturn's rings. Also, in 2013, astronaut Buzz Aldrin admitted that Tang sucks. We'd been had. NASA's marketing had told a really good story. But let me get my French on. All right. Jean-Francois Lyotard, in The Postmodern Condition, describes science as just another meta-narrative, an idea that is supported by so many other great thinkers. So why is it we feel developing minds can't handle this vision of truth? Maybe it's our own fear of chaos. We craft our many rituals in service of an idea of permanence. We tell the same stories over and over. In The Uses of Enchantment, child psychologist Bruno Bettelheim support development of important qualities such as self-reliance. He states, in a fairy tale, internal processes are externalized and become comprehensible as represented by the figures of the story and its events. In some traditions, fairy tales are even prescribed as medicine. Such poetic symbols are much more than the cosmetic overlay of comparison. They let us participate. Unfortunately, lessons about the world within our narratives are tainted with bias within their various contexts. By definitively categorizing and reducing ideas to manageable approximations, are we not teaching young students too many scenarios of right and wrong? Does this prepare us to weather the true conditions of life, or does it only set us up for disappointment? The harmful version of a meta-narrative is pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. We unteach the natural creativity out of children through rules and ridicule and single-mode instruction, because we are afraid their raw ideas might destabilize our institutions and reveal us all as frauds. As a creative writing instructor, I have found that I must give college students permission to free associate, to make mistakes, to play. I remember as a child asking my doctor once if I could have a copy of my sinus infection x-rays. To my young brain, they resembled blooming Rorschach flowers, but my doctor laughed at this idea. Luckily, I had already begun to suspect this system, so despite his shaming, I've continued my free associating to see, for example, how much my recent corneal topographies look like the surfaces of strange planets. I find, however, despite the onslaught of lessons about the true nature of the world, I'm still intensely nostalgic, still ill-equipped to deal with the blows of impermanence. Last year, my childhood home went on the market again. It's also the house that my mother grew up in. There's this great poem by Marvin Bell called About the Dead Man in Childhood that describes the experience of returning as an adult to the childhood home. You have seen the so heavy door that now barely resists a light hand. You have walked down the once endless corridors that now end abruptly. He also tells us that the new occupants do not consider how they are the destroyers of the past, unaware, in my case, that this is the window to my bedroom that the pine limb crashed through in a winter storm. This is the stone step where I bashed my chin open and had to get 10 stitches. This is the cabinet where I kept my Smurfs inside a plastic strawberry shortcake purse. This is the nook where I got my first phone call from a boy. This is the porch swing where, after we got dipped cones at Dairy Snack, my parents told me they were getting a divorce. But I'll never get to have the experience Bell describes in his poem, because this is what happened when the house sold again. Our house was torn down, not from necessity. It just didn't suit the desires of the new owners. They wanted this instead. Like a confessional poet, I'm delivering to you my personal fiction. stated as fact. Memory seems so certain, yet is so flawed. I've lived this, but it's also constructed. A lie of my own perception in the museum of my life. Each word we use is a fiction in itself, made up to represent and loaded with cultural assumptions and shifting meanings. Because I was not raised to understand this naturally, I do not embrace change easily. But if truth is flexible, maybe that difficult notion can actually be its own medicine. It gives us the ability to enhance our lives at will. Beyond the material crust, float rough rocks we've named. I still drink Tang. I still believe in Pluto. I believe the sky is the son of ether and the earth. Memory's the daughter of earth and sky and the mother of inspiration. I am returned unscuffed to the same house, one-story white, black shutters, where the geraniums on the porch are red as ever. Almost nothing's changed, though a few petunias may have folded for the night. Life's not fair, my mother often said, it never having occurred to her to fight for what she wanted. Now I know her silent life was something else. Sundays she'd drive alone down the highway out of town when it was a strip cut straight through rock face and hardwood. She could have kept on going had she dared. How different my life might have been if my mother had instead been able to say, "Here, take this, learn to make it your own." Thank you.
That was awesome. Our next speaker, Charles Boardman, is a gastrointestinal endoscopist, something like that. Basically, he spends his days rooting around in other people's guts. He's also a father of children and a children's book deconstructivist. Let's give a warm welcome to Charles Boardman.
I'm going to talk a lot about Goodnight Moon, so I hope that everyone is really familiar with that, which, if the data on sales for that book show anything, you should be. There are over 160 million copies in circulation in the United States, and something like 80% of all households own a copy. So I'm going to present 3 factual failures, 2 very small ones which may not be factual failures at all, and then one which I would argue is the largest of them all. The first is the idea that having children of your own would make you a good children's book author. I would argue that the contrary is true, that not having children makes you a better children's book author. I'm going to tell you some of the names of the children's book authors who never had children of their own, just to give you an idea. Maurice Sendak, Dr. Seuss, Beatrix Potter, J.M. Barrie, who wrote Peter Pan, C.S. Lewis, who wrote the Narnia Chronicles, and, of course, Margaret Wise Brown, who wrote Goodnight Moon. I have a theory about why this is, and for the purposes of not intruding into Chris Higgins' time, I'm not going to go into it, but if you're curious, I'll talk to you about it sometime. So that's the first. Those authors alone, by the way, represent about 60% of the top 20 most beloved and popular children's books of all time. So the second of the small factual failures I'm going to talk about is the idea that children's books are normal or cute. I strongly object to this idea, having read them a lot recently. I have 2 children, and I read them, as parents do. I read them books, and the same books over and over, and I look at them, and I think about them, and I ask questions about what I'm looking at and what I'm reading. And the more I ask questions, the weirder they seem. I would argue that children's books, rather than being normal and cute, are actually psychedelic, transgressive provocations to the myth of order. To do my close reading of Goodnight Moon, first I'm going to back up and talk about its creators. This is Margaret Wise Brown. She was born and raised outside of New York City. She went to college in Virginia. She studied literature. And she came back to the city, and she lived in the village, and she consorted with bohemians and poets and actresses. She went to the Columbia University Writers Program for a time, and then she, for another brief time, was a teacher in training at the Banks Experimental School, also in the village. She gave up working any kind of normal job altogether after she found success as an author of children's books. To give you some insight into the peculiarity and excellence of her character, I'll tell you how she died. With appendicitis. She underwent a successful appendectomy with a French surgeon. She then was confined to bed, as they did in those days, which we now know is not a good idea. And in the prolonged convalescence, a clot slowly formed in her leg. And she didn't notice it, and no one else noticed it. And when the doctor came to examine her to see if she was fit to go home, she stood up on the bed and executed a flurry of can-can kicks to show him how ready she was. And one of those kicks caused the clot to loosen and migrate up some vessel into her brain and snuff the candle out. And so this is a woman who died kicking her legs in the air on a doctor's table in France. The pictures were written by this fellow, drawn by this fellow, Clement Hurd. He went to school to become an architect at Yale, and I will remind you that in the middle of the 20th century, becoming an architect meant learning how to draw very precisely, because buildings where people lived, where people danced, where people slept, where people learned, flowed from those lines, and they had to be just so. And so he was very good at that. He wanted to become, so he went to France, and he studied. He became a disciple of Fernand Léger, the Cubist master. And he was there for some time. Then he came back to the United States. He didn't have much of a painting career, but he did find some success illustrating children's books. And through a friend of a friend, he met Margaret Wise Brown, and they began working on this project together, the first of several. So, this book is the product of 2 brilliant, creative, intentional, deliberate human beings. I'm going to make some very weird and wild arguments about what I see in it, and so I just want you to know that I'm not reading too much into things, that this was made by sensible, intelligent people who think about everything they do. One of the arguments that I would make about Goodnight Moon, which is only one of the theories I have about it, is that it portrays a post-human world in which the herbivores have risen into ascendancy and enslaved the carnivores and relegated them to increasingly ineffectual and ridiculous roles. In support of this, on the surface, outrageous hypothesis, I will cite this image that you're looking at. Look at the mouse, calm, blasé, unconcerned, watching the 2 cats who are clearly bewitched by some sort of vegetarian spell. These once proud killers cannot even tell that a mouse is there. I don't know if you've ever seen a mouse, but in fact, if you haven't, to their health and speed. These are creatures of the base very much out in the middle of the room watching cats. This is the middle of the 20th century. No one's been to space yet, but everyone's talking about it. Who first goes to space? Is it the proud, intelligent human whose quest for the salt of blood has driven him and her across the lands over the eons? Or is it the gentle ruminant, the herbivore, who proudly, powerfully, not only attains the nearest extraterrestrial body, but actually leaps over it? The cow jumps over the moon. The tides have turned and the herbivores are in control. I will point your attention next to the rug beside the rabbit child who is the protagonist of this story. To me, it looks like a tiger skin rug, and I don't know about you, but I've watched my fair share of nature videos, and I have never seen or heard tell of a rabbit acting alone or with even a very large group of rabbits, overcoming a tiger, murdering it, skinning it, and then putting its skin in their room. The tables have turned, ladies and gentlemen. The humans are gone, perhaps alluded to in the concerning bowl of mush, perhaps not. There's one more carnivore in this book that I haven't talked about yet. You see them on the wall. It is the bears. So here's this painting. It is difficult to tell much about the state of the bears from this painting. Their eyes are black dots, their faces fixed in a placid regard. There's 3 of them. They're sitting in a room. On the wall, you'll notice the painting of the cow jumping over the moon, perhaps a grim reminder of their subordination. You also see a window with the curtains parted in the middle. But it's hard to tell what they're thinking. I wonder if we should look closer. I still can't really read into them, but I want to know more. So this book is composed of alternating black and white ink and ink wash drawings and color paintings. There's a close-up of the bears in one of the color paintings, in one of the ink and ink wash drawings that I think shows a little bit more about their feelings and their minds. I will remind you that this was drawn by a trained architect and a painter who had apprenticed under one of the masters of the 20th century. This is a delicate, controlled hand at the peak of mastery of his medium and his tools. These lines are no accident. When I look at, let's look closer. I'm not making this up. I look at this book and I think, what are these bears thinking? They look overwhelmed. They look stricken. They look traumatized. We've all read this book. We've all looked at this. So I ask myself, what was it that traumatized these 3 bears? And I would argue that it was looking out that window. What are they looking at? What do they see out of that window? To answer that question, you have to know where they are. There are several possibilities. One of the things that happens in this book is the painted pages gradually grow dimmer and dimmer as the rabbit child gets closer to sleep. And in the final, dimmest, darkest page, there are 2 sources of light. There's fire in the fireplace, and there's the light on in the toy house. And I think, who is in that toy house? Why is the light on? What is it that causes the inhabitants of the toy house to be unable to find sleep? Look at the curtain. These poor bears, again, the victim of some herbivore spell, have been shrunken and incarcerated in the toy house. And they lived there happily enough for some indeterminate period of time, but then one day one of them looked out the window. And when they looked out the window, they saw not only giant rabbits and a giant mouse and a giant painting of the cow jumping over the moon that hangs on their own wall, but they also saw a giant painting of them sitting in the chairs they always sit in the room that they always sit in. And they thought, what the fuck is going on? And that accounts for their expressions. Look at them. They have had an existential crisis. They have no idea what is real. And I know that face, and I know that feeling because I've felt it myself. I've looked out the window of my own toy house plenty of times and thought, what the fuck is going on? I have no idea what's going on. And no one else has any idea what's going on. Not a single human being has any idea at a deep level what's going on at all. And I think about this in terms of things that are small. I look out my toy house at the tiny things, at the atom. The atom in Greek means uncuttable. Well, it's not. It's cuttable. There are subatomic particles. Subatomic is a ridiculous word. It means things that are smaller than things that there's nothing smaller than. And behind those subatomic particles, there are even more subatomic particles. And I guarantee you that that goes on forever. And that the more sophisticated our tools of looking get, the more we'll see, and the more we see, the more we'll realize what we don't see. And of things large, of the universe is another false word. Etymologically, it means all turned into one. Reality of things. Well, the universe is 14 billion light years old, and that begs the question, what was going on 15 billion years ago, 20 billion years ago, 100 billion years ago? What was going on a trillion years ago? And maybe time isn't the right question to ask. Maybe before the Big Bang isn't the right way of saying it. Maybe time is just an emergent property that's specific to the rules and patterns of the universe that we know. But I guarantee you there was something before the Big Bang. Nothing comes from nothing. We don't know about it. If you think about the universe, Ethan showed some slides of spheres. Maybe it's shaped like a sphere. Maybe it's some other weird shape. We're figuring that out. But I guarantee you that there's something beyond that. Or maybe in the multiverse theory, that this universe is just a phenomenon in the skin of the bubble of another universe that we can't perceive or relate to or understand, with totally different rules and patterns and beings. I would say I have no idea what's going on, and nobody has any idea what's going on, and no one ever will. That the circumference of the unknown will always exceed the circumference of the known. And I think those bears are experiencing that in the way that I experience that when I think about things. And it's kind of an untenable existential position. It's not a functional way of living. You can't have a job or drive a car or feed your cats or floss your teeth so your hygienist won't give you a guilt trip. You can't be in a relationship if you're constantly thinking, I have no idea what's going on at all. I have no idea what's going on. I don't know why I'm me and not you. I don't know why I'm not a nutria nibbling on a mangrove root in a swamp in northern Louisiana 87 years ago. I don't. I don't know why, and I never will. So that's a really scary, overwhelming, it's not even a thought, it's a mental experience. It's a really scary experience to look out the window of your toy house and see all of that and realize you don't know. But I've got kids, and I have to be a parent, and that's not a tenable parenting strategy to say, I have no idea what's going on, welcome. I have to tell them things about what it takes to be a human, the ways to be. And I have to do my job. I have patients, I have students, I have people who rely on me. And I can't live in that I have no idea what's going on state, as true as it may feel. But I sympathize with these bears, with their wide eyes, their inability to even stand up and turn off the light. The way they can't even talk to each other about this overwhelming truth that's visited them. It's a little bit like when you're out at the beach on a beautiful day and the sun is piercing the water and you can hear the voices of your friends and the crack of a can of beer. You swim out a little bit. You feel the power of your body and the length of your body gliding through the water. And then a cloud passes over the face of the sun. And the surface of the water becomes opaque. And you look down, and you can't see anything. And your feet don't touch. And you realize you have no idea how deep it is or what's down there. And you feel soft and slow and weak. But maybe I'm making too much of all of this. It's just a children's book. And I wonder, why do we read these books to our children? Why do we tell them so many stories over and over and over? Why do we tell them the same stories over and over and over? Why do we tell each other stories all of the time? Why do we tell each other the philosophy stories about logic and truth? Why do we tell each other the religion stories about redemption and grace and creator gods? Why do we tell each other the science stories about DNA and photons and bosons and leptons and strings? Why do we tell so many stories? We're never going to get to the bottom of it. Why do we tell our children so many stories about things that we have never seen, that they will never see, about islands full of enormous monsters and talking turtles and sentient rabbits trying to go to sleep in a tomato-colored room? And I realized that it's not the content of the stories, it's not the characters of the stories, it's not the facts that drive us to tell them over and over again, but it's the telling of stories at all. We live by telling stories to each other and to ourselves, and it's only by telling stories that occasionally our feet brush up against the sand, even if we'll never get to shore. Thank you.
Wow. Our last speaker of the night is Chris Higgins, author of The Blogger Abides. His work has appeared in This American Life, in Mental Floss, and The Atlantic. In his Curiosity Cup talk, he regaled us with tales of hacked Coke machines and social perils of being a 13-year-old guppy expert. Without further ado, Chris Higgins.
I say that was goddamn delightful. Holy crap. I have three brief things I want to say before I start doing the thing. First is a mild trigger warning. This story is a true story that involves mention of poison. And I'm not going to be graphic about it. I'm not going to show any pictures of it. But if you have a thing about that, I have told you. Second thing is, I'm a writer and sometimes journalist, and I tell stories using music and quotes. In this case, the quotes, the recorded audio comes from the Associated Press, The World in Sound, 1982. It's a vinyl record that my father gave me 1995 or thereabouts. I've been obsessed with this series of records. Every year they'd send them to radio stations to do kind of a news wrap-up, and they're very handy if you want to do the old news. And the third thing is that I owe a lot to my parents. They're in the audience tonight, they're out there. They're from West Virginia and visiting. Thank you. Thank you, parents, and thank you for clapping. I picked up a lot of this from my dad, but I'm just sort of morbidly obsessed with things like some of our other speakers tonight. So I'm going to tell you about the origin of a phrase called trust Tylenol. And by the way, at times I will tell my AV man to start things, but we're not ready yet. This story starts on some cake and some flowers for his wife for dinner that night, and a bottle of extra-strength Tylenol capsules. He was feeling kind of achy. As I said, he was a postal worker. He took a capsule from that new bottle of Tylenol, and his wife found him convulsing and rushed him to the hospital, where he died. These are Stanley and Teresa Janis. Stanley was Adam's brother, and that's Stanley's wife. They went to the hospital and they watched their brother die. And this was understandably very upsetting. So they had a fucking headache. So they went back to Adam's apartment, where his wife was also grieving. They spotted a bottle of Tylenol on the counter. They each took 2 extra-strength capsules. They fell down on the ground and convulsed and went to the hospital. They were brain dead for several days until Teresa's family could arrive from Poland to pull the plug and say goodbye. It's not all this morbid, but it's most of this morbid. Can I get the music bed, please? This one's probably the worst. This is Mary Reiner. She had given birth 6 days earlier. The hospital gave her a packet of Tylenol capsules to help her with any pain after the birth. And one of those capsules killed her on September 29th. They both told police, who very quickly connected the dots. Can I get audio cue number 3?
An important message from the makers of Tylenol.
We have voluntarily withdrawn all Tylenol capsules from the shelf. We will reintroduce capsules in tamper-resistant containers as quickly as possible. We want you to continue to trust Tylenol.
Actually, can I get audio cue 2?
Food and Drug Administration Commissioner Dr. Mark Novich studied the evidence.
The capsules were opened and cyanide was inserted into the capsules. When the capsules were opened, the normal, very fine, powdery substance that is in there also included a very obvious crystalline substance and an odor, the typical odor of cyanide gas that told the story.
Do you guys know what cyanide smells like? The typical odor? It's almonds. That's gross to know. But he knew that. So Chicago police and fire trucks roamed the streets with bullhorns saying, "Don't take Tylenol, it's killing people." And warnings were broadcast in the media locally and nationally. Many people just flushed their Tylenol down the toilet, which would be a very sane reaction to this sort of thing. Store owners voluntarily pulled Tylenol from the shelves, fearing they were selling a poisoned product. 2 days after that first death, Jane Byrne, the mayor of Chicago, banned the sale of Tylenol within her city, ordering the few store owners who had not removed it to take that shit away. We had a problem. Johnson & Johnson had a problem. Johnson & Johnson was the maker of Tylenol. This company was also the maker of baby powder, baby shampoo, Band-Aids, Bengay, and all kinds of products that people had always trusted for years, associated those with health, wellness, getting better, taking care of your baby. This brand was now associated with murder. 6 days after the first death, Johnson & Johnson recalled all Tylenol capsules from store shelves across the nation. This was 30 million bottles, and it cost $100 million to do this. I'm going to read that quote for you in a second, so you don't have to read it yet. But I just want to tell you, Tylenol's market share dropped literally overnight the day they pulled those, from 37% of all over-the-counter painkillers to 7%. The 7% that was left was the tablets, the things that aren't the little capsules that you could take apart, and you could put some cyanide in those. They were the leader. They were the market leader, and also this was about 19% of Johnson & Johnson's overall revenue. So this really sucked. Jerry Della Femina, who's an ad executive, said, "I don't think they can ever sell another product under that name," meaning Tylenol. There may be an advertising person who thinks he can solve this, and if they find him, I want to hire him, because then I want him to turn our water cooler into a wine cooler. And we'll return to Jerry in a bit. He's a colorful guy. Audio cue number, I'm going to say 3. I think my numbers are.
An important message from the makers of Tylenol.
We have voluntarily withdrawn all Tylenol capsules from the shelf. We will reintroduce capsules in tamper-resistant containers as quickly as possible. We want you to continue to trust Tylenol.
Sounds like an important message. Dr. Thomas Gates, the medical director for McNeil Consumer Healthcare, which was actually the subsidiary of Johnson & Johnson that made the Tylenol, was chosen for TV ads to deliver this message about trust because he seemed so trustworthy. This is where the slogan, "Trust Tylenol," comes from. It didn't exist before the poisonings in '82. There's something about this guy's voice telling us to trust him that makes him sound like an undertaker or like an evil deity or something. And I just wanted to play this piece again a little bit so you hear who's telling us to trust him. Next cue, please.
We want you to continue to trust Tylenol. We want you to continue to trust Tylenol. We want you to continue to trust Tylenol. We want you to continue to trust Tylenol.
Sure. No problem. So Johnson & Johnson, together with the FBI and the FDA, tried to figure out what the hell was going on, right? And they advanced a theory very quickly that a lone madman, this is my lone madman over here, had poisoned Tylenol capsules from the shelf, that somebody had gone and purchased them, taken them home, taken the capsules out and put cyanide in them, then put them all together and put them back. In doing this, Johnson & Johnson said, in addition to the 7 people who died, Johnson & Johnson was also a victim of a third party. This is a very important thing to consider when we consider what Johnson & Johnson asks us to think of them. But the blame is not maybe like in the factory or maybe like the place where the bottles get put into the capsules get put in the bottle, but in this unnamed, uncaptured individual who still has never been found 33 years later. This was also a bit of a psychological shift in the way that we thought about our safety. There are a lot of problems with the lone madman theory. The biggest one was, how did this guy poison Tylenol at a hospital where Mary Reiner was having her baby? That Tylenol was locked up in a medicine cabinet, and it came in a direct shipment from a distributor. Most of the evidence points to the poisoning happening somewhere in that supply chain, from Johnson & Johnson to where these things are sold. But they didn't want to talk about that. The more convenient fiction was to say that somebody had gone shelf to shelf, which is, in many cases, actually possible. And we'll get to that again in a second. The thing is, there was a lone madman, but I don't think he went shelf to shelf. I think he worked in a factory somewhere. New laws were drafted basically immediately, within weeks, requiring that consumer products came in tamper-evident packaging, sometimes called tamper-resistant, and never called tamper-proof. Tamper-evident just means that a reasonable person could see if the product had been tampered within a store. Now, this emphasizes the idea that the tampering happened in a store, and that Tylenol is pure, it comes from the central source. And this marked a change in how we think about medicine. This is Amitai Etzioni, a professor of sociology. Next cue, please. It's this quote.
So far, most of us felt that objects can be trusted.
George Washington University sociologist Amitai Etzioni.
Suddenly, this event cuts into this last layer, that even inanimate objects like pills and capsules and such have to be suspect.
This guy's still alive, he's still working. And it's odd that we, in a moment, did have to consider that pills, that something we would buy intentionally to put in our bodies to heal us, would kill us and had killed us. So the new law said there had to be one layer of tamper-evident packaging on this, bottle of pills or whatever it was going to be. Tylenol was back on the shelves within 7 weeks of the poisoning. I just want to point out what that means. 7 weeks after they pulled it off the market, they had basically written the new law with their lobbying group, gotten it passed, which also made it a federal offense to tamper with consumer products, and they were back on the market, and the item that they had was triple sealed. Foil seal on the top of the bottle, the cap goes on, plastic seal around all of that, then the box, you had to rip it to shreds, and there was no way to open that and reclose it without it being literally ripped in half. Johnson & Johnson showed this package to the Secretary of Health and Human Services named Richard Schweiker, who said, everybody else is going to have a package, but you've got an armored tank. Because Tylenol had made this armored tank package, when it returned to the market, ironically, it was the most tamper-evident product in the world. It was arguably the safest product you could buy if you wanted to buy something to relieve your headache. That's weird, but that was the truth. And they also inserted large discount coupons across the country to get people to buy Tylenol. And in the wake of this poisoning thing, this was the only game in town if you wanted to know if somebody had tampered with your drugs. Within a year, Tylenol had regained its market share and was again the leading painkiller. This turnaround was genuinely stunning. Remember that marketing guy who said he wanted to hire the guy who figured out how to sell the product called Tylenol again? Well, that ad agency sent him a water cooler filled with wine. I'm going to quote Della Femina here. He says, "I drank the wine and toasted them. The next thing I want to do is take them these loaves of bread. I'm going to send them some loaves of bread. If they're so good with water, let's see what they can do with bread." End quote. So when I was in school, when I was in college, this was the story I was taught, that this was a triumph of crisis management. And it's taught in marketing and PR classes. That Tylenol came back at all, much less so quickly, and in such an amazing package, truly was a triumph, and I can't take that away. But that's actually not where the story ends. 3 years later, in Yonkers, New York, Diane Ellsroth wasn't feeling well. She asked her boyfriend for a painkiller. He took one of these armored tanks off the shelf. He just bought it that day. He ripped off the first layer, the second layer, and the third layer, took out a painkiller and gave it to her, and by the morning she was dead from cyanide poisoning. Long story short, this is actually a very long, very complicated story. Tylenol capsules and their armored tanks were pulled from shelves and examined by labs at the FDA, still sealed, and they had x-rayed them before they opened them up and looked at them. A total of 3 sealed bottles with all tamper evidence in place contained cyanide capsules. So logically at this point, we know that there is no pure source of Tylenol and that the armored tank doesn't actually protect us. However, Johnson & Johnson upped the ante, and the CEO went on Donahue, among other things, and it's a very 80s thing, and suggested that this lone madman had managed to open up the armored tank off the shelf and put the poison pills in, replicate the foil seal and all that business. Johnson & Johnson's own research department said that they couldn't figure out how to do that. The FDA basically demonstrated that that was impossible. Then Johnson & Johnson offered a $100,000 reward for any information leading to the capture of the lone madman. This reward is unclaimed. We're left with a very unsatisfactory result that is self-contradictory. While it's true that the Tylenol comeback in '82 was amazing, and it was an example of crisis management, and therefore that story is true insofar as what they did was the right thing to do to bring their product back to market, it was based on a theory that didn't hold up. It is simply not possible that someone removed the armored tanks, and perhaps it was possible somebody removed the other things from the store shelves and put them back. At the same time, the lone madman is a very convenient fiction for all of us. If we trust that Tylenol is pure, then the only way it could kill us is if somebody tampered it with on a store shelf. And when we accept that, we're accepting a very heavy load. And here's the thing, what Johnson & Johnson was telling us with its lone madman theory was that the primary danger facing you guys as consumers was you guys as consumers. That one of you is a lone madman and you're going out there killing people with this supremely sophisticated and indeed increasingly sophisticated method of randomly killing people with no apparent motive. I should also point out there were copycat killings where people did open up other products that used capsules right around the time of the Tylenol poisonings and later as well, and put cyanide or other poisons in them and killed people, and then planted additional ones to try to cover their tracks. They were often caught, and lots of folks went to jail. This was a popular way for people to kill their wives in the 90s. It doesn't work well. Now, the thing about this idea that we are dangerous to each other, and by creating tamper-evident packaging, Johnson & Johnson had turned consumers into detectives. They had brought all of us into the process of ensuring drug safety for ourselves, which was previously their problem. You can't protect yourself from a poisoned pill that comes in an armored tank. You just can't know what's in there. You can unwrap all the shit you want to pull off of there, but if you can't trust that that actually means something, and if you can die like Diane Ellsroth did, what does it matter? What is the point of pulling apart the 3 layers of tamper-evident packaging? And the strangest thing about this is the Tylenol murders. You know, once the 82 murders happened and the copycat murders followed and all these drugs were pulled off the market and repackaged and put on there, is that the thing they said about the lone madman became true. Other people had learned there was a new way to kill other people, and they went out there and killed other people by doing that thing. This sucks. There's not much more of a conclusion to it, frankly, than that once this genie comes out of the bottle, you can't stuff it back in. Every brand eventually had to adopt packaging and eventually move capsules that could be opened. They were replaced with something called a caplet, which is a sealed capsule. And indeed, for Johnson & Johnson, that is their 4th layer of tamper-evident packaging, because you can see if the caplet seal has been degraded. So now Johnson & Johnson has 4 layers in their armored tank, and nobody's been killed by cyanide, as far as I know, since '86. Incidentally, the law now requires 2 layers of tamper-evident packaging, and you can check that next time you buy something at the grocery store. As I said, the genie was out of the bottle, and there was no going back. Product tampering from store shelves did kill people after this initial lone madman theory. And this is bizarre and this is sad because it confirms what Johnson & Johnson was telling us with its first version of the tampering story, that we are in danger both from tampering and from poison that we cannot detect. This brings me to another 80s phrase that resonates with the word trust. Ronald Reagan trotted this one out against Gorbachev. It was his translation of an old Russian axiom, which was trust but verify. As my father pointed out to me over breakfast the other day, trust but verify is neither true nor technically possible. If you trust someone, you don't have to verify. And in most cases, you can't verify shit. How do I know where the nukes are? How do I know what's in that pill? I just have to trust. And so when Reagan was saying that, he was kind of saying a little F you to Gorby. And this is what Trust Tylenol feels like to me. I'm going to read this quote for you. You don't have to read the tiny text. This is Johnson & Johnson CEO James Burke in '86 after the second set of poisonings. He commented on the issue of trust. He said, when the poisonings in Chicago occurred, we cashed in on over 95 years of trust that we had built with the consumer. Everybody in the country believed in us because of our history, because of what Johnson & Johnson was. Anyone who'd ever used the baby powder or a Band-Aid or whatever had that attitude toward the company. And what our research shows us is that even today, after having gone through one of these scares previously, the public still feels that trust. And that's why we're bringing Tylenol back. So I want to mention something, which is that the ways that Tylenol marketed its products, one that's stuck around for over 40 years, is it's something like the #1 doctor-recommended painkiller. This is technically true, and it's been true for decades. The way they did it was they sold Tylenol branded pills to hospitals at less than the cost of generic acetaminophen. So what happened was, if you were in a hospital and you needed a painkiller that wasn't aspirin, your doctor would give you Tylenol with a brand name, and you would trust that it worked because it did work. The only reason that it's the #1 doctor recommended medication is because it was basically free, and it was the only one that was available. So that happened. In my lifetime, I've seen several examples of this kind of story and this kind of response, and I think that as grim as it is after 9/11, the TSA is a pretty good parallel. You know, like one guy tries to bomb something with his shoes, no more shoes. Somebody tries to bomb something with some liquid, no more liquid. We're told if you see something, say something. None of this really makes us safer, but it's a convenient fiction to make us feel like at least we're doing something. When you see that slogan, trust Tylenol, or you think of the murders in 82 and 86, I urge you to think less about the triumph of crisis management and more about how we think about each other as dangers to one another. I encourage you to be good to each other and to consider that the lone madman existed. I don't know his motive, and I don't think he'll ever be caught, but he wasn't doing the thing that we thought he was doing. We accepted that, as it was a story, and it was a convenient one that unfortunately became true. And if we have 2 minutes left, I have a song that I put together in, I think, 1997, when I first went back to this record, listened to it, heard this story, and my friend Paul from next door and I tried our first experiment in sampling. Tobias, do you want to cut the music bed and try that?
People do it every day. They open the medicine cabinet and reach for a bottle of painkiller.
So far, most of us felt that objects can be trusted. Suddenly, this event cuts into this last layer that even inanimate objects like pills and capsules and such have to be suspected.
In all, 7 persons in the Chicago area died after taking the poison capsules.
The capsules were opened and cyanide was inserted into the capsules. The capsules were opened and cyanide was inserted into the capsules. The capsules were opened and cyanide was inserted into the capsules.
An important message from the makers of Tylenol.
We want you to trust Tylenol. We want you to trust Tylenol. We want you to trust Tylenol. We want you to trust Tylenol. We want you to trust Tylenol. We want you to trust Tylenol. We have voluntarily withdrawn all Tylenol capsules from the shelf. Capsules in tamper-resistant containers as quickly as possible. We want you to trust Tylenol.
People do it every day. They open the medicine cabinet and reach for a bottle of painkiller. They open the medicine cabinet. People do it every day and reach for a bottle of painkiller. People do it every day. They open the medicine cabinet. People do it every day and reach for a bottle of painkiller. And reach for a bottle of painkiller. And reach for a bottle of painkiller. And reach for a bottle of painkiller.
We want you to trust Tylenol.
Thank you, and be good to each other.
All right, thank you guys so much for coming down here. Let's have another round of applause for our speakers for doing this. It's great. And thanks to Hollywood Theater, and thanks to Hand-Eye Supply for supporting us for almost 5 years doing this. We have an email list out in the lobby and some shirts for sale, so if you want to buy them, it's great for us. All right, thanks everyone so much for coming out tonight. Have a wonderful night.